Financial advisor, financial planner, broker, wealth manager? Confused by all the names and titles? On this edition of Money in Your Pocket, Dr. Patrick Lach from Eastern Illinois University returns to talk to us about the confusing world of investment advising. He'll provide us with some information on what to look for when choosing someone to manage your money. Don't go away. Money in Your Pocket starts right now.
This program is made possible in part by Credit Union One. Proud to support Money in Your Pocket. Credit Union One offers savings and lending options. Additional information on membership available at creditunion1.org. Loans subject to approval. Accounts are insured up to $250,000. By members' choice, this institution is not federally insured.
Welcome back to Money in Your Pocket. This week, Dr. Patrick Lach from EIU School of Business has returned to talk to us about financial planning. This is going to get a little bit complicated because there's a lot of names out there. Let's start with that.
Well, it all comes down to what's in a name. There are so many titles out there that people are legally allowed to use that have no meaning, even though many people, I believe, are confused by those titles. For example, financial advisor, financial planner, wealth manager, those are all titles that are not regulated, and anybody could throw those underneath their name. Really, the only title that's regulated is registered investment advisor. So if somebody has a registered investment advisory firm and it's a sole proprietorship, they could use that as their title. But generally, registered investment advisor refers to the firm, and investment advisor representative refers to the individual. So in my case, Lach Financial, the investment advisory firm that I own and operate, Lach Financial is a registered investment advisor. I am an investment advisor representative. So those two terms are the only terms that are legally regulated. Everything else, anybody can call themselves whatever they want.
Okay, and we also hear terms like investment advisor and broker. What are those?
Well, an investment advisor, actually it's a pretty old act that governs all of these rules. It's the Investment Advisors Act of 1940. So to be an investment advisor, you have to provide advice regarding securities, be in the business of providing such advice, and you have to be compensated for receiving the advice. So if you do those things, you're a registered investment advisor. There's a few exceptions. For example, I'm also a finance professor at EIU. And when I'm in the classroom and I'm teaching about the difference between a Roth IRA and a traditional IRA, although that could be considered advice, I'm actually a teacher, and any advice I'm giving is incidental to my job as a teacher. Brokers receive a similar exemption from the Act of 1940 because the law recognizes brokers as being salesmen in the business of effecting transactions. And any advice they give must be incidental to their job as a salesman. The distinction is important because under the Investment Advisors Act of 1940, although the Act mentions nothing about the term fiduciary, which I'll get to in a minute, courts have later ruled that if you're an investment advisor, you owe a fiduciary standard of care to your clients, which means you must put the client's interests ahead of your own, you must disclose conflicts of interest, you must keep fees and expenses reasonable. So for many people, this is my own opinion, I think finding somebody that's a fiduciary is a no-brainer, because a broker, on the other hand, simply has to recommend products that are suitable for you given your financial situation. They don't have to keep fees and expenses reasonable. They could recommend high-expense products so long as those products are, quote, suitable to the investor.
Okay, so what exactly does this, I don't even know what to call them, financial person, financial profession, what is their job? What is their role?
Well, it depends. A registered investment advisor is by law required to act in the client's best interest. And registered investment advisor can provide advice regarding investments or any other type of investment products, could assist with financial planning, etc. A broker by law is only allowed to sell products. If they give advice, it can only be incidental. They can't be in the business of providing advice. So registered investment advisor is a fiduciary. All these other terms, again, financial advisor is a meaningless term. Financial planner is a meaningless term. Wealth manager is a meaningless term. They all are usually words that brokers will use when they're holding themselves out to the public.
So at what point in your financial career should someone seek or would they need a financial person?
Well, I think you can make a strong argument that everybody, needs to see a financial advisor or an investment advisor. I just caught myself doing it. Everybody needs to see an investment advisor to at least touch base and see where they are. Some people early on might not need a whole lot of advice other than, maybe they want to sit down with an investment advisor and for an hourly fee get a plan towards paying off debt. In my opinion, somebody that has some debt might not even need to see an investment advisor, because going back to the health analogy we talked about on an earlier segment, I think when it comes to being healthy physically, many people know what they have to do. And it's an issue of having the self-discipline to do it. So I think with paying off debt, many people know what they have to do. They've got to cut cable, they've got to reduce expenses however they can to get the debt paid off. So if you're going through debt, I think it could be helpful to see an advisor, but in many cases, I think people know what they have to do to get out of debt. Once you begin investing, I definitely think it can be very helpful to see an investment advisor.
Do the vast majority of people use an investment advisor, or are there more people out there just buying stocks and doing things on their own?
Well, there's some people that use an investment advisor. Other people go with brokers. There are some people that try and do it themselves and try to go it alone, usually with not very good results. But they're usually very convinced of their own plan. Oftentimes those people will come in and they'll ask for my advice, and I'll give them my advice, and then they come back and defend the plan. And I'll say, okay, did you come in here for advice or validation? So there are some people that try to do it themselves, but frankly, the amount of damage that people can cause trying to do it themselves far exceeds the cost of hiring an investment advisor.
So you've decided this is too much for me. I need a financial advisor, right? Investment advisor.
It's confusing.
It is. It's very confusing. What should I be looking for? Because you can open up the phone book, look online, you can find all sorts of things. So how do you know?
Well, going back, you could find all sorts of things. There's also, it's alphabet soup when it comes to designations. I have 9 letters behind my name. I have PhD. I have a PhD in finance from Mississippi State University. I have a CFA charter, which is Chartered Financial Analyst, and I have my Certified Financial Planner Certificate, CFP. Most people are familiar with CFP, but there are literally, I think there's 100, I was reading an article the other day, I believe the count is now up to 157 financial designations. Some of them, like the CFA charter, require rigorous study to get through. The CFA exam, it's 3 levels that must be passed in order, and the average successful candidate reports, I believe it's 300 hours of study per level, which is about the amount of time that people spend studying for the bar exam. So I tell people, in my opinion, the CFA exam is like passing 3 different bar exams in a row. It's incredibly rigorous. On the other hand, some of these other credentials, all you have to do to get them is have the ability to write a check for $200 or $300. So in my opinion, the only designations that matter, in my opinion, CFA is the gold standard. Again, I have my CFA and CFP, and although most people recognize the CFP, and this is my own personal opinion having passed both, I believe the CFA exam is about 4 times more rigorous than the CFP. Doesn't guarantee the person is going to be competent. I've met people with the CFA charter that have investment philosophies that I strongly disagree with, and that empirical peer-reviewed academic research disagrees with. So having somebody with a CFA charter doesn't guarantee that they're competent, doesn't guarantee that they're ethical, but it does guarantee that they have something to lose, which I think is incredibly important in an advisor. The CFP designation, like I said, not nearly as rigorous as the CFA credential, but personally, if I was looking for an investment advisor, I would want somebody with a CFA charter, just because, again, it's important to have somebody with something to lose. There's one other designation that I think is valid and valuable and rigorous. I don't have it because you have to have your CPA license to get it, and that is I believe it's PFS, it's Personal Finance Specialist. So in my mind, those 3 designations are, in my opinion, the only ones that are valid. I think if you see somebody with a string of, I see people in this business with a string of 6 designations behind their name, and I recognize 2. So those are the credentials: CFA charter, CFP certificate, or the PFS designation, which is part of the CPA program. Those are the only 3 designations that I think you should look for.
So if you find someone and they have the correct things after their name, You go in and meet them. What are some questions that you should ask them?
I think the most important is, are you a fiduciary? Because again, there's so many titles people could put under their name. I think you need to ask, are you a fiduciary? And I always tell people it's not enough to ask, because I've seen advisors lie to clients via email, a documented means of communication. So behind closed doors, one-on-one, maybe this is the cynic in me, given that I've seen advisors or brokers lie via email, I would have no doubt that they might be tempted to misrepresent themselves in person. So ask if they're a fiduciary. If they say yes, ask them to put it in writing and sign it. If they refuse, if they say, well, it's a firm policy, we're not allowed to put that in writing, I think you should find somebody else. Now, in terms of where to find an investment advisor, there's a couple places you could go. In my opinion, two good places to start are the Financial Planning Association. On their site, you could filter, you could look for a fee-only investment advisor, which it's the advice that Consumer Reports gives. Another way you could find a good fee-only investment advisor that Consumer Reports does not recommend, at least not last I checked, is NAPFA, which is the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors. So NAPFA, NAPFA.org is another great site to look for a fee-only advisor. Now, I'm on the Financial Planning Association site. I'm not on NAPFA just because NAPFA, it's a much more rigorous application process, and I'm still trying to find time to go through that process. But I will say NAPFA, they review all of your materials. You have to write a sample investment plan before you could go on their site. Financial Planning Association, to be a fee-only advisor on Financial Planning Association site, it's self-selected. So the advisor could click fee-only, and there's really no oversight in terms of which boxes that people check. That's why I prefer NAPFA over Financial Planning Association.
Okay, so ask if they're a fiduciary. Check out those websites.
Well, not just ask. Make sure you get it in writing. Yes.
Okay. Ask and get it in writing. People obviously don't do this for free.
Exactly.
They get paid for it. And
exactly.
Talk about the ways in which investment advisors make their money.
Well, there's the commission model, which is where a broker will sell you a product and they get a percentage of what you invest. The broker and the firm will get a percentage. Typically with most stock mutual funds, that percentage off the top is usually 5.75%. And then on top of that, the mutual fund has expenses that they charge. That's one model of doing business. This is just personal preference. I believe that model is fraught with conflicts of interest. In fact, within the last 3 years, the United Kingdom has outlawed the receipt of commissions from the sale of financial products. So is Australia. And also, surprisingly, so is the Netherlands, a country where drugs are decriminalized and prostitution is legal. So that gives you an idea of where the Dutch government views the receipt of commissions from the sale of financial products. So again, I acknowledge that's just my opinion. The government bodies in the United Kingdom, Australia, and the Netherlands seem to agree with me. But many brokers will just tell you, well, it's just another way of being compensated. But I think it's fraught with conflicts of interest. The fee-only route is the route that I prefer. It's the route that I recommend to people. It's the compensation model that Consumer Reports recommends to
Okay, so
individuals.
how does that work then? Say I come to you and I have $10,000. Please invest this.
Well,
how much of that do you get?
There's 3 different ways an advisor can charge fees. You could charge fees based on an annual retainer, where the advisor might charge you $3,000 per year. My problem with that model is it's $3,000 per year regardless of the future performance of your investments. So your portfolio goes up 30% or down 50%, the person is still making his $3,000 per year. An alternative method is a percentage of assets under management fee. So with my firm, one of the 2 ways that I'm compensated is I charge a 1% fee of assets under management. So for example, if somebody walks in with $100,000, to make the math easy, my fee would be $1,000 per year. The advantage of that is if the market goes up 20%, my fee goes up 20%. It aligns my interest with the clients. If the market drops by 50%, so does my fee. So there are people out there that argue, the criticism of that model is they'll say, yeah, but are you really spending 10 times more effort on a $1 million account than a $100,000 account? The bigger the account, typically the more complicated it gets. But to me, the big issue is having somebody with some skin in the game, having somebody that's going to feel a 50% drop right alongside of you. So That's why I'm a big advocate of hiring an advisor that's charging you a flat percentage of assets under management. An alternative method, and this is the other way that I'm compensated, is hourly advice. So you could go into an advisor's office, they might charge you $150, $200, $250 an hour to develop a plan to answer any questions you have. The downside of that is it's the responsibility of the client to implement that plan. So sometimes, and I've seen this in my own experience, sometimes people don't implement the plan the way you recommend they implement the plan.
So you sit down with your investment advisor, and I talk about this from experience. They'll give you a couple of plans, and one is more aggressive, one's sort of in the middle, and one's really conservative. How do you know which one to pick?
Well, and this is where my own opinion comes into play. I think the advisor should offer his opinion on which one he would recommend. Because, for example, if you hurt your arm and you go into the doctor's office, the doctor doesn't walk in and say, well, do you want me to get an x-ray? Do you want me to do an MRI, or should I put it in a cast right now? The doctor's going to tell you, you need to get an x-ray, and after the x-ray, he might say, you need to get this in a sling. So I think you want an advisor. Now, granted, a lot of it is personal preference. For example, I don't know what's more important to you, whether it's retiring early is more important to you, or whether leaving a legacy to charities or people near and dear to your heart is more important to you.
And those are all questions that your advisor should ask you.
Yes.
When you walk in, after you've answered those,
Yes.
you should say, well, what do you want?
Exactly.
What's your future?
Exactly.
If they're not, and that's probably not a good thing either. So
Yes.
if it meets your needs, then that's how you should go about it. Okay.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about some proposed legislation when it comes to investment advisors and brokers. We talked about that before we started taping.
Sure, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's really heated up around, I believe it was around late February, early March. The Department of Labor for the longest time had expressed concern regarding the fact that, of course, there are brokers that are held to a suitability standard. They don't have to act in the client's best interests. They don't have to disclose conflicts of interest. They don't have to keep fees and expenses reasonable. So you have brokers operating under a suitability standard. Now, when you're working for an employer, if you have a retirement plan such as a 401k plan, by law, the administrators of that plan must operate under a fiduciary standard of care, meaning the plan administrator of your 401k or 401a or 403b, whatever type of retirement plan you have, they by law are required to make decisions in the best interests of the plan participants. So where the Department of Labor expressed concern, and where the President of the United States expressed concern, is that while you are employed, that 401k, the administrator is held to a fiduciary standard of care, which is the highest standard. Well, what often happens is somebody will be working, they're contributing to the 401k, managed under a fiduciary standard. They switch jobs, and then a broker comes along, usually calling themselves a financial advisor, and they convince that person to roll the 401k over. And the problem that the Department of Labor and the President of the United States have with that is that while it's in the 401k, it's under a fiduciary standard of care. When you roll it over to a broker, it's now dropped to a suitability standard. And the Department of Labor has said, we have a problem with that drop in standard of care if it's rolled over to a broker. So the proposed legislation would require that if you want to roll over a previous 401k, that you have to roll it over to somebody operating under a fiduciary standard of care.
Which is in your best interest, not
exactly.
in theirs.
They must be operating in the client's best interest.
Real quick, this may be getting off subject. When people do change jobs and they go from one to the other. They had 401k here, 401k there. What do you recommend?
Typically, most 401k plans, although the plan administrators are required to act in the best interest of the clients, usually the expenses are high. Usually diversification options are very limited. Usually international investments you could pick are virtually non-existent. So a lot of times I recommend somebody roll it over to an IRA just because there's better investment options I could use within an IRA. I could pick investment options with lower costs. I can get more diversification.
How often should you be, once you're on board with them and you start working, how often should you be talking to them and maybe revising the plan?
I like to meet with my clients at least twice per year, just because the way I operate, again, everything I do, I base on empirical, peer-reviewed academic research to the extent that I can. There are some things where there's no academic research. In our previous segment, I said I like a 25% debt-to-income ratio. There's no evidence that supports that. But whenever possible, I like to use empirical, peer-reviewed academic research to drive what I'm doing with clients. So my investment plans, basically the person's preferences and where they are in their life is going to drive their investment plan, which is going to drive their portfolio. And so I don't change the portfolio unless there's a change in their investment plan. So I like to meet with people twice per year at a minimum just to see, how are things going in their life. A lot of times we'll create goals. How is paying off the student loans going? How is getting out of credit card debt going? I like to see the progress they're making. And also meeting with them allows me to see when a change has occurred or when a change is going to occur.
Okay. So how do you break up with your financial advisor if it's not working? Maybe you're just not feeling it anymore. How do you get out of that?
It's one of those things, it could be difficult to do. I've had clients that, tell me that's one of their concerns is, I've had clients come in and they say, I'm dreading the breakup. And I always tell them, a lot of times breaking up with your advisor is, it's a weird analogy to use. It's, in some regards, it's kind of like unfriending someone on Facebook. They won't know, the advisor or broker usually doesn't know unless they look up your account. Now, in some instances, they might be notified if there's an outgoing transfer. But if you're working with somebody that's not a fiduciary, that refuses to put in writing that they're a fiduciary, I think that's a perfectly legitimate reason to walk away. But again, that's personal opinion.
So talk about this as an industry as a whole. You made a very interesting point that there's no, and this is why it's frightening, we're taking our savings for our retirement and handing it over to someone. This industry has no minimum education requirements. It's a little a lot frightening, actually.
It is. When I walk into my dentist's office, I've never asked to see his diploma because I assume he graduated from dental school. I assume to hold a drill and put it, into my teeth, you have to have significant training and education. But the reality is, for most Americans, the person who cuts their hair is held to more rigorous education requirements than the person that manages their money. Like you mentioned, there is no, in most states, every state's a little different, but in most states there is no formal education requirement to get into this business. Typically, all that's required is that you pass either the Series 7 or Series 65 or some similar exam, which, according to the industries that administer the exam, they're only designed for, quote, entry-level positions. So, if you think managing your life savings is an entry-level task, then hire somebody that has the Series 7 to nothing else. But you're exactly right. There's no formal education requirement. The exams that you have to pass, I haven't taken them because in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, where my advisory firm is based, if you have your CFP certificate or your CFA charter, you don't need to take the series exam. So I've never taken the exams. A lot of my students have taken the exams, and they've come back and told me the exams are not very rigorous. So that's why I'm a big advocate of finding somebody with a CFA charter, because it doesn't guarantee that they're competent or ethical. It guarantees they have something to lose. Because what's so scary in this business is the education standards are virtually non-existent. And one of my favorite investment writers for The Motley Fool, Morgan Housel, summed it up better than anybody I've ever read. He said, there is no other industry in the United States where people capable of causing so much damage are held to such low standards.
Very well said. And with that, I think the point is, do your homework.
Exactly, because many people, when they walk into a broker's office or an investment advisor's office, I talk to people that have told me, when I tell them there's no formal education requirement, you could be a high school dropout, pass your Series 7, and you're ready to manage people's life savings. And their jaws drop to the floor, and they said, well, I thought you had to have at least a master's degree to do that. And so many people walk into an advisor's office, they don't ask about the person's education background. There's a lot of people that don't have college degrees, or they have college degrees that are not business related. So it's important, like you said, do your homework. Ask the person's education background, ask what kind of certifications they have. But the most important question is, are you a fiduciary required by law to act in my best interest? And number two, will you put that in writing?
All right.
Those are the first two questions you should ask. If the answer to both those questions are not yes, I don't think there's any reason to ask anymore.
All right. Well, Dr. Lach, thank you so much for coming back
Thank you.
on Money in Your Pocket and shedding some light on financial planning for us. It's a complicated topic.
It is.
And you've made it a little easier to understand.
Thanks.
What's the bottom line for today's show? Do your homework when thinking about using an investment advisor. There's an alphabet soup of titles that people can have, so you want to know about their education, training, and certification. Ask and get in writing if they have a fiduciary responsibility for your account, meaning they're looking out for your best interests, not theirs. And finally, here's a few of Dr. Lach's website recommendations for researching investment advisors: napfa.org and plannerresearch.org. We're out of time for this edition of Money in Your Pocket. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
This program is made possible in part by Credit Union One. Proud to support Money in Your Pocket. Credit Union One offers savings and lending options. Additional information on membership available at creditunion1.org. Loans subject to approval. Accounts are insured up to $250,000. By member's choice, this institution is not federally insured.